Hey everyone, and welcome to another deep dive. Today we're going to be looking at World War II. You know, that global conflict that went on for 6 years, from 1939 to 1945. It's one of those huge historical events that just about everyone knows about, but it can be pretty overwhelming to wrap your head around all the details and everything that happened.
You really can't.
We're going to try and do it in just 10 minutes. We're going to break down the most important facts, the big turning points, and the things that really shaped how the whole thing went down. So to help me out with this massive task, I've got, a historian who is like amazing at connecting the dots between all these different events and showing us just how everything fits together.
But I don't know about all that.
Oh, come on. You're being modest. All right, so where do we even begin with World War II? I mean, there's just so much to cover.
Well, I think the best place to start is at the very beginning. You know, with Germany invading Poland in 1939.
Right. That was kind of a big deal. It was the event that essentially kicked off the whole war. Britain and France declared war on Germany right after that.
Exactly. And it's interesting because Britain's prime minister at the time, Winston Churchill, he kind of saw this coming. He had been warning everyone about the threat posed by Nazi Germany.
Oh, yeah, that's right. And he gave that really famous speech, "We shall fight on the beaches." Like he was preparing the British people for a long and difficult fight.
And it certainly was.
It definitely was. The war raged on in Europe for 2 years before things took another dramatic turn. I'm talking about December 7th, 1941, Pearl Harbor.
Yes. Pearl Harbor, a date which will live in infamy.
Exactly. That surprise attack by Japan on the U.S. naval base in Hawaii, it brought the United States into the war. And that changed everything.
It did. It brought a whole new level of resources and manpower to the Allied side. The United States had a huge industrial capacity, and their involvement really shifted the balance of power.
The European theater was already a huge battleground, but with the U.S. joining the fight, things were going to get even more intense.
Definitely. And one of the most important turning points in that theater was D-Day. Yeah. Operation Overlords, June 6th, 1944.
Right, of course. The largest seaborne invasion in history. Allied forces stormed the beaches of Normandy in France. I mean, the scale of that operation is just mind-boggling.
It really is. They created these artificial harbors called mulberries. They used specialized tanks called Hobart's Funnies. I mean, the planning and coordination involved was incredible.
And they had this whole deception campaign too, right?
Oh, yeah. Operation Bodyguard. They tricked the Germans into thinking the invasion was going to happen somewhere else entirely. It was all very clever.
So D-Day was a success. I mean, it was costly, but a success.
Oh, absolutely. It was a major victory for the Allies. It opened up a second front in Europe, and from there they were able to push towards Germany. But it was still a long and hard-fought campaign.
And it wasn't all smooth sailing for the Allies, was it? I mean, there were some setbacks along the way.
There were. Operation Market Garden, for instance.
Tell me about that.
Well, it was in September 1944. The British Field Marshal Montgomery, he came up with this ambitious plan to capture a series of bridges in the Netherlands. The idea was to open up a route into Germany and maybe even end the war quickly. But it didn't quite work out that way.
No.
What happened? Well, the operation was too ambitious. It relied on everything going perfectly, and it didn't. They ran into strong German resistance and logistical problems. They just couldn't get everything they needed to where it needed to be.
Because it failed.
It did. They called it a bridge too far.
I can see why.
Yeah. It was a reminder that even with the best plans and the best intentions, things can still go wrong in a war.
Yeah, it's definitely unpredictable. And even as the Allies were making progress towards Germany, Hitler still had a few tricks up his sleeve.
Oh, absolutely.
Like the Battle of the Bulge.
Ah, yes. December 1944. Hitler launched this surprise counteroffensive in Belgium and Luxembourg. It caught the Allies completely off guard. It was a brutal battle fought in freezing conditions. It really showed how desperate Hitler was to turn the tide of the war. But it was also his last gasp. The Allies eventually pushed back, and after that, the German army was really on the ropes.
Yeah. From there, it was pretty much a race to Berlin. The Soviets captured the city in May 1945, and the war in Europe officially ended on May 8th, 1945. VE Day.
Victory in Europe.
Exactly. But even though the fighting was over in Europe, the war was still raging in the Pacific.
Oh, yes. The Pacific Theater, that's a whole other story. The Pacific Theater was a completely different kind of war. You're talking about this vast expanse of ocean and islands. The distances were incredible, and the logistics were a nightmare.
Yeah, we talked about island hopping a little bit in the last segment, but I'm still not sure I get it. It sounds kind of random. Like, how do you even choose which islands to attack?
Well, it wasn't random. It was actually very strategic. The U.S. realized they couldn't just go and attack every single Japanese stronghold. It would take forever and cost way too many lives. So they focused on capturing key islands, ones that would give them air bases and supply depots.
So it was like kind of leapfrogging their way across the Pacific.
Yeah, you could say that.
Yeah.
They would bypass some islands and focus on the ones that would give them the most strategic advantage. But even with that strategy, the fighting was incredibly brutal.
I can only imagine.
Battles like Tarawa, Iwo Jima, Okinawa, these were some of the most intense and bloody battles of the entire war. The Japanese defenders fought with incredible ferocity.
I've read about those battles, and it's just mind-blowing, the courage and determination on both sides.
Absolutely. And then you had figures like General Douglas MacArthur. He was forced to retreat from the Philippines early in the war, but he famously vowed to return.
Yeah, his I Shall Return speech was pretty epic.
It became a rallying cry for the Americans in the Pacific. And when he did return to the Philippines in 1944, it was a huge morale boost.
But the fighting didn't stop there, right?
Oh, no. It was far from over. The battles for the Philippines were some of the bloodiest of the war. And then there was the rise of the kamikazes.
The kamikazes?
Yeah, Japanese pilots who would deliberately crash their planes into enemy ships. It was a sign of just how desperate the Japanese were becoming.
That must have been terrifying to witness.
Oh, it was a desperate tactic. It showed how far Japan was willing to go to defend their homeland. But in the end, it wasn't enough.
And then, of course, there was the atomic bomb.
Ah, yes. August 1945, the United States dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It was a decision that's still debated today.
It was a turning point in history. It brought the war to an end, but also ushered in the nuclear age, a whole new era of warfare and global politics.
It's a moment that changed the world forever. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, I think it's important to talk about something else, something that's often overlooked when we talk about World War II. The home front. The millions of people who weren't on the battlefields, but who were still contributing to the war effort.
Right, the people back home working in factories, rationing supplies, sending letters to loved ones overseas.
Exactly. The war effort couldn't have been sustained without them. It was a total war. Everyone was involved in some way. And one of the most significant things that happened on the home front was the changing role of women.
Right. With so many men away fighting, women had to step up and take on jobs that had traditionally been done by men.
They worked in factories, shipyards, offices. They did everything. It was a huge shift in gender roles and really helped to pave the way for greater equality in the years to come.
It was a pivotal moment for women's rights. And it wasn't just on the home front. Women were also involved in resistance movements in occupied territories.
Yes, they played a vital role in the French resistance, the Polish Home Army. They were spies, saboteurs, messengers. They risked their lives to fight for their countries.
And then there's the whole issue of technological advancements. World War II really seemed to accelerate innovation in so many different fields.
It did. Necessity is the mother of invention, as they say. And in wartime, that necessity is even greater. So you had all these incredible breakthroughs. Radar, penicillin, jet aircraft.
It's amazing to think about how some of the technologies we take for granted today have their roots in World War II.
It's true. But of course, with any technological advancement, there are always ethical considerations.
Right, like the atomic bomb. It ended the war, but also raised all sorts of questions about the destructive power of technology and the responsibility of scientists.
It's a debate that we're still having today, and it's a reminder that we need to think carefully about the implications of new technologies, especially when those technologies have the potential to cause such widespread harm.
And now, as we wrap up our discussion of World War II, I think it's important to remember that we've really only just scratched the surface.
We have. There's so much more to explore. We could spend hours talking about the political complexities, the diplomatic maneuvers, the different battles and campaigns.
Right. And we focus mainly on the European and Pacific theaters.
Mm.
But the war was also fought in Africa, Southeast Asia, even the Arctic Circle. It truly was a global conflict.
It was. And I think it's important to remember that even though we talk about it as World War II, it wasn't just one big war. It was actually millions of individual stories, millions of people whose lives were impacted by the conflict.
And each of those stories is important. Each one adds to our understanding of this complex and multifaceted event.
Exactly. World War II wasn't just about battles and strategies. It was about people. About their hopes, their fears, their sacrifices.
And I think that's something we should always remember as we study and learn about this period in history.
And as we kind of wrap up here, think about World War II. It wasn't just armies clashing or countries fighting for land.
It is bigger than that, right?
Yeah, much bigger. You had these completely different ways of thinking, these ideologies going head to head. It was like a battle for what humanity should even be.
That's a really good point. On one side, you had the Axis powers, Germany, Japan, Italy.
Yeah.
They wanted to take over everything, basically. And they had some pretty messed up ideas about race and stuff.
Yeah, like this whole idea of racial purity and a master race. They wanted to reshape the world in this really distorted image.
But on the other side, you had the Allies. And they were this really diverse group of countries all fighting together to protect democracy and freedom.
They were fighting for a world where everyone had a chance, where justice and basic human dignity were valued.
It was a fight that went way beyond borders. The outcome was going to affect everyone everywhere.
Absolutely. And, the world we live in now, it's directly shaped by what happened in World War II. I mean, look at the way countries interact, the organizations we have to try and keep peace, even the tech we use every day.
Wow, yeah. It's like the whole world is kind of remade in the aftermath of that war.
In a lot of ways, it was. We've talked about the military stuff, the tech, how society changed, and of course, all the lives lost. But I think the thing that really stays with us, the real legacy, is this. We saw just how dangerous things can get.
Like we learned a lesson about how bad things can get if we're not careful.
Exactly. Unchecked aggression, countries just going after each other, the breakdown of diplomacy, the world just standing by while terrible things happen. World War II showed us all of that in the worst way possible.
So it's a reminder to be better, to work together, and to stand up for what's right.
Absolutely. Those freedoms and that peace, they came at a huge price. We can't just take them for granted.
Well said. So as we finish up this deep dive into World War II, I hope everyone listening will keep thinking about its impact, even today. How has it changed the way you see the world? What can we learn from what happened, from both the good and the bad? And how can we use those lessons to make the world a better place now? These are questions we all need to think about. World War II might be in the past, but it still matters, It shaped our present, and it's going to keep affecting our future.
It really will. And that's why it's so important to keep learning about it, to remember what happened, and to honor those who sacrificed so much.
Thanks for joining us on this journey through World War II. We hope this deep dive has given you some new insights and made you want to keep exploring this huge and fascinating part of history.
Keep learning, keep asking those questions, and let's all work towards a better future, okay?